More than 3.5 decades ago, Ontario pioneered the now ubiquitous Blue Box that's supposed to divert waste from landfills into recycling. With us now on how well it's doing that and where change is in the works, let's welcome in Montreal, Quebec, Myra Hurd. She's a professor at Queen's University and the author of Canada's Waste Flows. And in Orangeville, Ontario, Joanne St. Godard. She's executive director of the Recycling Council of Ontario. And we're happy to welcome both of you to our kind of virtual setup here on TVO tonight. And we're grateful you could spare some time for us. Let's start with this. Joanne, how much of what a person places in their blue box every week or every other week, as the case may be, will actually end up recycled?
We're using the blue box very successfully over the last decade. We are collecting about 63% of what could be recycled, so we're still losing some materials to disposal. And of that which gets put into the blue box, generally the recycling rate is still high, about 55 to 57%. So not everything that goes into the blue box currently is successfully recycled, but certainly the majority.
And Myra, let me get you to follow up on that. Why is it not 100%, or why can't it be 100%?
Well, the promise of the blue box and the reality of the blue box are two different things. So it's quite complicated as to what is actually going to get recycled and what isn't going to get recycled. So, for instance, if we're talking plastics, not all plastics can actually be recycled. So we might put a lot of plastics into our blue bin, but only a certain proportion of them can actually be materially recycled. Another factor is markets, right? That we've privatized the blue box program, et cetera. And so, if there's no market for the recyclable material, then recycling companies can't make a profit. And so they will take the recycling, but then they will divert it back into disposal. And in Ontario, when we're talking about disposal, we're talking mainly about landfilling. So it's, just because we put it in the blue box doesn't mean that it's actually going to get recycled.
In fact, Joanne, I saw a statistic by a report by Environment and Climate Change Canada that found that just 9% of plastics end up recycled. Why would that number be so low?
Yeah, I think Myra hit it on the head. I think all the commodities and all the materials that are put onto the blue box and other recycling programs, often we really think about, when we think about plastics, we're really only thinking about packaging, but plastics are everywhere, and we use them ubiquitously in the production of many products. So, but it's their abilities to actually get collected and successfully recycled are completely dependent on their commodity values and market remanufacturing applications. And for much of the recycling, in particular the more flexible plastics, the market value is very, very low. Their applications in remanufacturing are very, very limited, very narrow, and there's too much of them. We're never going to recycle our way out of a plastics problem.
Joanne, can I ask you about whether you think when Canadians put what they think are recyclables in a blue box, do you think they're under the impression that it's all going to be recycled, or do they understand that actually a fairly limited percentage of it is?
Yeah, I think people are always using the recycling programs, including the Blue Box program, because they should. And despite some of the low numbers that we're seeing, and even only some of the materials that go into the Blue Box do end up in disposal, they should absolutely continue to use their Blue Box program. It is a successful program, and without it, we would have put millions of tons of more material, plastics and other, into disposal and energy from waste type facilities. So, but I do think that consumers, they put their efforts into using the blue box, with the impression that everything that goes into it will get successfully recycled. That's not actually the case. But we have to remember that we're still not using the blue box to its maximum. We're only getting about 65% of what we could put into the blue box that could be recycled into it. We're still using the garbage bag, unfortunately. So people should have faith and confidence, and should continue to use it.
Myra, what's your view on that?
Well, I think that for at least a couple of generations now, I remember, back when I was a kid, learning about recycling and the big, recycling, logo was everywhere, and there's been a giant education campaign. And so I do think Ontarians, by and large, try to be faithful to this idea that, if we put things in the blue box, then it will come back to us as another product eventually, whether it's a plastic, pop bottle will then come back to it, we'll purchase another plastic pop bottle. But what we've forgotten in that is that the recycling was supposed to be really, you know, just above, putting it in the ground, putting our garbage in the ground. And we forgot about the reduce and reuse. And so moving forward, we've really got to, and, Ontario recognizes this. There was a fantastic, report written by the environmental commissioner of Ontario called Beyond the Blue Box, and that really talks about we need to get beyond the blue box. Like, that's really still quite low hanging fruit, and as Joanne says, it's not going to get us out of our waste problems. So we really need to be focusing on reducing and reusing. That's really where we need to be putting our energies, not in this idea that we can just keep producing and manufacturing and retailing and consuming, and somehow magically some technology, chemical reprocessing, for plastic will magically disappear all of our waste problem. That's not going to happen.
Joanne, should we go as far as to say that we maybe ought to be feeling a little bit guilty that we're not reaching the potential of this program as much as we either could be or need to be?
Yeah, I think the reality is that, and people have to remember that the Blue Box is 40 years old. It is a program that was created and intended to, at the time, collect as much material at the beginning. And it was really designed originally for newspapers and metals, and plastics. Is only in terms of their proliferation into the marketplace, has really only happened over the last few decades. And so the Blue Box, over time, has tried to accommodate the myriad of different packaging types that we're now seeing onto the marketplace, and laminates and packaging that have a combination of materials that make it ever more challenging for the recycling system to try to keep up. So the design of packaging and these more complicated and varied types of packaging have happened much more quickly than the recycling industry and the commodity values or the commodity markets have been able to accommodate. And so the question is, what else in addition to the Blue Box? Even though it has its success, it is limited, and it is, in my opinion, overburdened. So what else in addition to recycling packaging in the Blue Box should we be doing? And absolutely, reduction and reuse have to be part of that equation. And I might remind everybody that, in fact, the Blue Box is only designed and still continues to only service us in our homes. It doesn't address the largest part of the waste sector, which are the waste that's generated in our province and, quite frankly, in the rest of the country, which is in industrial and commercial applications or sectors. They are woefully missed in terms of any kind of government policy. There is, they're serviced very disaggregatedly and through the private sector. And so we really don't even have any good data to tell us how we're doing. But we do know that most of the material that is disposed of in Ontario and the rest of the country is generated from away from home, from non-residential generators.
Well, let me stick with homes for a second for Myra, but not housing homes, apartments and condos. I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing, number one, there are still probably older buildings that don't recycle at all, or if they do, they've got really lousy recycling programs there, as in people don't sort their stuff properly. Just take us down the road. What happens if, in circumstances like that, the waste is not appropriately or properly sorted out and recycled properly?
Yeah, well, Steve, you raise another excellent point, which is the whole way in which our recycling is being collected, and as we know, contamination is a big problem. So, for instance, here where I live in Montreal, a truck comes by and takes all the recycling all together and puts it in a truck where it squishes it down, and then it's taking it to a sorting center. by doing that, it's increasing the likelihood of contamination between these products. So if there's food left on some of the recycling, if there's that contaminates it, and then it makes it even more difficult, if not impossible, and certainly not financially viable for recycling companies to take that. Apartment buildings, especially older ones that lack a really good system, compound that problem where the contamination is going to be is going to just increase, and then it makes the recycling impossible and not economically viable. One of the things that I think is really important for us to stress is the importance of composting, because composting is a real recycling success story. It's really the best recycling success story we've got. And it's really, really important for us to be trying to implement as many composting systems as near as we can to our homes and businesses. When we're taking composting and then we're trucking it using non-renewable fossil fuels long distances to some composting center, that decreases the benefits of composting. But we could take a page from Scandinavian countries such as Sweden, where apartment buildings have got their own composting system. So rather than a truck picking up the compost and taking it long distances, we have each apartment building has its own composting system, and so residents of each apartment building can be using their own extremely local, right on their doorstep, composting system, and that is fantastic. That's a wonderful recycling success story.
Joanne, let me ask you the $64,000 question here, which is, if you've finished a tub of peanut butter and you can't get every little last bit of the peanut butter out of that tub, is it better to throw it in the garbage as opposed to putting it in the blue box where, as we've heard, it could contaminate other stuff that's in there? Advice, please.
No, absolutely use your blue box. There is a certain amount of tolerance for what would be described as contamination or materials that are residual in containers. It's always helpful if the residents will, very quickly rinse out, but there's no need to, make the container pristine or completely clean. There are, as part of the recycling system, there are certainly sorting and washing facilities, and certainly, when you think about plastics, and in quite in all for all the materials, there is a processing process that will, or a remanufacturing process that will actually naturally clean the commodities. So a little bit of cleaning's fine, but it's still be putting it in your blue box 100%.
Gotcha. Okay. Myra, let me pick up on this issue with you. How does Canada's recycling program stack up when it's compared to other programs in the rest of the world?
Steve, that's an excellent question, and I want to turn that question to say, let's not focus on the very end, which is collection and recycling. When we look at other countries are doing a far better job of the more upstream, which is making manufacturing and retailing, businesses far more responsible for all of this packaging, et cetera, that is then sort of dumped on municipalities and dumped on consumers to take responsibility for. So I think that consumers have had far more of the burden that they've had to shoulder for all of this packaging, all of this material. And manufacturing industries and retailers have not had to shoulder sufficient financial and other burdens. So if we look at countries like Germany, Scandinavian countries, they're doing a far better job of requiring manufacturers and retailers to take responsibility for all of this stuff that we're producing. When I buy something, I want the good. I don't want all that packaging, and yet I have to take responsibility for it, and my municipality has to take responsibility for it. We pay for this through taxes, etc. We really need to have far more regulations at the provincial level and the federal level that requires manufacturing and retail to take responsibility, to shoulder the burden for all of this packaging, etc. We've really held manufacturers and retailers to a very low responsibility for this, and we could be doing a lot more. And we would find very quickly, as they've found, for instance, in Germany, that if we make manufacturers more financially responsible for all the packaging, then we get innovations in packaging design, etc. We get far more alternatives to the kinds of packaging that we currently have, like polystyrene, like other plastics.
I have a feeling we may have just happened upon our first area of significant disagreement between you two. I'm just guessing here, but Joanne, do you think that industry needs to bear a greater share of the burden, as Myra has suggested?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Myra. And extended producer responsibility is actually has been an active policy of most provincial governments in Canada. But unfortunately, in Ontario, we still have this 50-50 cost share model where municipalities, aka taxpayers, are actually subsidizing, and have been for the better part of 3 decades, the cost of not only recycling but also disposal. And this government in particular, put their hand up and said we're going to make producers 100% responsible, but we haven't seen that as yet. There's been several discussions and lots of consultations and some discussion papers, but they haven't actually crossed the finish line. And this is a critical policy, as Myra has said, to transference the full cost of end of life management of packaging. And the intent of this is to actually incent industry to improve designs, to improve systems, to get away from one way or single use packaging into more reusables, better durability, and certainly more recyclability. So that's the intent of the policy. And if I could go even further than Myra has suggested, we've seen in Europe where they have the highest recycling rates in the world, where they support that with a disposal levy. So they make actually disposing in the country more expensive than recycling, and they change the economic disparity between the two activities by adding a disposal levy. So where we've got an average disposal cost here of about 150 to 180 tons or dollars per ton, it's 2.5 times that in Europe. And so it's really not cost effective to dispose. It's really, there's an economic incentive there to actually find more better designed products, more reuse, certainly more reduction in the system, but obviously cheaper to actually recycle than dispose.
Now, can I tell you, I'm a little surprised at that answer, because I would have thought that your position might be, you know what, industry's bearing a heck of a load right now. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. It can't afford to take on more responsibility. The consumer, I'm afraid, is going to have to bear the burden that they're bearing right now for a little while longer until ... No?
Yeah, well, obviously there has been a huge impact on business as a result of during the pandemic and as a result of the pandemic, but there's also been a burden on municipalities and consumers as well. And so the idea is, who is the actor in the supply chain that actually has the most influence on reducing waste? And it is not the taxpayer, it is not the consumer, and it is certainly not municipality. So, and quite frankly, they have been disproportionately paying for their share for about 4 decades now. And in fact, we've heard a lot of leading businesses actually stick their hand up and say, we're okay with being more responsible. We understand that we have a role to play. We certainly understand that we have the most influence in the system to improving it. And so they're stepping up. So I would say, even though there certainly has been impact on business, the cost of waste does not go away during a pandemic or because of a pandemic. We still generate a lot of waste in this country, and there's still a cost. And so, we think that the best actor in the supply chain, again, is the producer and the manufacturers choosing these packages and choosing these products to bring them onto the marketplace.
In which case, Myra, I need you to explain this to me. If government wants this to happen, and there are industries that are prepared to put their hand up and say, yes, we understand this needs to happen, and presumably consumers and municipalities would like to see it happen, why isn't it happening?
Well, it would seem logical that it would have already happened if everyone is completely on board. The fact of the matter is, I mean, I completely agree with Joanne, and I've had businesses, small and very large businesses, contact me genuinely wanting to discuss ways that they can decrease their packaging, their environmental footprint, and that's wonderful. There is also, a consortium of businesses that are strongly resisting moves to make them more responsible for instance, plastic packaging. So we so it's great that some industries, some manufacturers, and some retailers are moving in this direction, and that is really excellent. And we need more examples coming from, Europe and anywhere in the world where they're doing a better job than us. But we also need very strong government at the federal level and at the provincial level who are helping municipalities to uh, make stronger demands on waste management companies and recycling companies. As it stands, recycling and waste management companies really have the upper hand in negotiations with municipalities. Municipalities are too hamstringed, in my view, and we need much stronger regulations and policies at the provincial level, so at the Ontario level and at the federal level. We could look to, for instance, to British Columbia. If we're looking across Canada, then I think British Columbia is doing some really, at the provincial level as well as the municipal level, doing some really interesting things in terms of extended producer responsibility, in terms of single-use plastic bans, etc. And it's difficult for the municipalities to do it without the support of the at the provincial level. So we need far more federal and provincial uh, commitment, real commitment in terms of regulations and in terms of policies.
Joanne, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but I would like to get a sense of what kinds of businesses are the laggards here. You said some are happy to put their hands up and say, yes, we can do more. Who tend to be the ones who say, not interested?
Well, I think all you need to do is to Google sustainability leaders, and you're going to see some of the more familiar brands. Certainly, the retailers who have stepped up globally. Certainly, the multinationals who are facing regulatory pressures all around the world and have recognized in this broad plastic crisis that has been recognized by the globe, certainly on a Canadian and an Ontario context, and we've got reports now coming out of the Great Lakes that talk about the amount of microplastics and plastics in general that are being found in food chains. And so I think, and under that context, we're seeing a lot of the familiar multinationals, certainly some of the familiar brands. And I think, to the point of the laggards, I think for those that have stepped up and have made commitments and are activating on those commitments or actioning those commitments, governments need to support them, because it really becomes unfair to them to try to move forward in these leadership positions when government allows the laggards to take over the conversations, or to try to accommodate companies that are either blaming the pandemic or blaming market unfairness. In fact, what we should be doing with policy is really carving paths for the leaders that are stepping up, and that's really what the shame is here.
Myra, I just take me back a couple of years, because I remember we used to send tons and tons and tons of this stuff to China. And then a couple of years ago, China said, we're turning off the taps. We're not going to buy your stuff anymore. So all of that recyclable stuff that we used to send to China, what are we doing with it now?
That's an excellent question. So it isn't actually just China. We used to send a lot to China, but we also send, as in these high-profile cases, we know that we also send to the Philippines and to Cambodia and other countries. So when China instituted, as it's known as the plastic ban, Canada, like other countries, has been scrambling. And as well, we have the Basel Convention and trying to get Canada to sign on to the transboundary amendment, which would prohibit us from exporting our plastic and other so-called recyclables. In fact, Canada actually exports a lot of our plastics to the United States. And Canada and the US recently signed a bilateral agreement that will allow, for the next 3 years at least, for Canada to continue to import some recyclables from the United States, and for us to export other plastics and other commodities to the United States. So in fact, the US is a big trading partner for us in terms of waste and in terms of recyclables. But it's very true that we are amongst the countries, and we can include Europe in this, who are really scrambling to find ways of getting rid of our waste. And unfortunately, one of the realities is that exporting waste is still financially viable. It is still, it can be cheaper in some ways than keeping the waste in our own regions. And so it's something that regional levels of government turn to.
Well, on this Earth Day, we are happy to remind everybody about the 3 R's. We've been talking about recycling, but let's also reduce and reuse as well. Not a bad idea. Myra Hurd from Queen's University, Joanne St. Goddard from the Recycling Council of Ontario. It's good of both of you to join us on this Earth Day here on TVO. All good wishes to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.